And some of these, of course, are very unusual. They're like very foreign to you, and some of them are quite common. In fact, you'll probably see that the domestic house cat is on this list as well. So because the species are on this list does not necessarily mean that they're necessarily inherently bad. In fact, some of them are species that have value in some places inherently, or sort of human value, and they've become a problem in other places. But European green crab is right here in this top row. It's one of the few invasive marine species on this list. And I would be remiss if I didn't just go over the basics of how we identify European green crab or European shore crab, because it's very helpful. We sometimes call them green crab, although it's terrible to try to identify a crab by its color alone. We have a lot of native crab species that are also green. And so we don't want to use color as the primary diagnostic characteristic. What we tend to do is we look at the morphology of the crab. So you're looking at the back shell, what we call the carapace here, and I'll step you through it. First of all, there are the eyes. These crab maximum size of an adult is right around 4 inches across the back shell, so about the size of a fist. We grow them bigger in our neck of the woods than anywhere else in the world. That's, I guess, a claim to fame that we don't necessarily want. Um, but that's about their maximum size. We identify them because they have 5 carapace teeth, or we use the carapace teeth on the outer margin of the shell as a diagnostic feature. So that's these points starting with the eye and working outward. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And because crabs are bilaterally symmetrical, we have the same 5 points on the left and the right side. And honestly, if you come across a crab on the beach and you count up those teeth out on the outside of either eye, if it has 5 points, it's a green crab. If it doesn't, it's something else. It's a pretty cut and dry diagnostic feature. We sometimes also point out that there are 3 bumps between the eyes. That's sometimes helpful as well, especially if the carapace is damaged. But those points really are a dead giveaway. All right. And the name Carcinus manus, I should point out, it's Latin. Carcinus is crab. Manus is an interesting one. And essentially, the way that these crabs got their name is that Linnaeus, who is sort of the father of our sort of modern system of naming plants and animals, thought that Carcinus Manus would be a good name, because Manus basically means raving mad. So it comes from this sort of behavior of theirs to sort of act very tough, stick up their claws, and look for a fight when they're confronted. So Carcinus Manus really just means raving mad crab. I think it's kind of an apropos name. So raving mad crab is its scientific name. This crab, as the name implies, European green crab or European short crab, is native to Europe and North Africa. It's pretty broadly distributed, but it's spread all around the globe. The east coast of the US, South Africa, Australia and Tasmania, Atlantic Patagonia, and relatively recently the US West Coast. And of course, it's spread like wildfire on our coast. So they were originally established in San Francisco Bay uh, sometime in the late 80s. Um, and they resided there for quite some time before they spread up the coast, distributed largely by periods of El Nino conditions. El Nino conditions cause just a massive movement of water up our coast. It's like a conveyor belt, and things that are in California end up on our coast pretty commonly during those periods of time. So then in 1998, which is roughly the time I started working on green crab, they ended up in the outer coast estuaries of Washington State. That's Grays Harbor and Willapa Bay. And then over the subsequent years, They spread along Vancouver Island, and it wasn't really until 2012 that they ended up within the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And in 2012, our colleagues in British Columbia identified an abundant population in a place called Souk Basin, which is a really interesting little embayment right near Victoria. And because of that, everyone became pretty alarmed. We thought that the Strait of Juan de Fuca was sort of a natural barrier that might prevent their spread. It turns out that the predominant flow of water through the Strait of Juan de Fuca is actually from east to west, and so a lot of surface water, especially from the Fraser and the Skagit River, flows of the out through the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So we thought that was going to be a natural barrier. It turned out that it wasn't. There was some additional human mediated spread, and then they ended up in Souk Basin. All right, and I think the important thing to point out is that green crab, an individual green crab, I already told you, is only about the size of your fist, not very big crab, doesn't have extremely large claws. And so it's not a single crab that we're worried about. If it was just a handful of crabs here and there, it wouldn't be an issue. It's just that green crab have a tendency to reach extremely high abundances. And that's actually not an uncommon feature of invasive species. They tend to be species that, when they spread to new areas, actually can reach very high abundance. And it tends to be through that high abundance that they generate most of their impact. What you're seeing here is a time lapse of a 3-hour period. This is a trap that was set in Massachusetts, actually. And so this is an area, a marsh area that's heavily impacted by green crab, to the point where there's just, green crab are the most abundant critter present. And this is just the catch from one 3-hour period on one day. And this group sets these traps out every single day, and they catch, traps full of these hundreds and hundreds of crabs. So it's when these crabs become really abundant that they have the biggest impact. And that is a feature of a lot of invasive species. And just to give you an idea of what kind of impacts they have had around the globe, this is actually what you're looking at on the right-hand side of this image. Well, actually, I should say on the left-hand side of the image, that was a very large eelgrass meadow in this case in Maine. And on the right-hand side, you're looking at the same area actually about a year later, after a really large explosion of the green crab population in that region. And the assumption and the conclusion of the researchers studying this area is that it was the explosion of the green crab population, the foraging behavior of the green crab as they root through the mud looking for mostly small clams and worms that cause the eelgrass meadow to be eliminated. So they can be pretty destructive, especially when they reach really high abundance. They also have a tendency to do a number on marsh banks and marsh habitats as well. This is from Wells National Research Reserve. What you see is sort of the deterioration of the marsh bank. And this is achieved because green crab like to burrow into marsh banks to create habitats for themselves, little burrows, especially at low tide. And so you think to yourself, well, how did they cause that deterioration? Well, again, it's just sheer numbers. What you're looking at in this short video, hopefully you can see that. This is actually from Newfoundland. And these are bounty hunters that are out removing green crab, and they're slicing open part of a marsh bank, and you just see it's riddled with green crab, thousands upon thousands of these crabs. I won't continue with that video, primarily because bounty hunters are not necessarily very humane when it comes to dispatching green crab. It's not a pretty sight. But I do, so that's sort of the scale of that's a little bit on green crab and a little bit about them. But I know Emily wanted to to provide a little primer on what's sort of unique about the process of a species becoming invasive, and so I figured I'd give you a little primer on that, and in so doing, give you a little bit more information on green crab in the process. And if you can think about the invasion process as having sort of four components, and what's really interesting is that at each one of these steps, um, a species uh, can can go from just spreading to an area to becoming established, and then spreading, and then having an impact. Um, but each one of these steps has to be successful along the way. And so there's all kinds of species that get spread around the globe that never become invasive. And that's because as they spread, they aren't successful at any one of these stages. For whatever reason, they don't establish, they don't become a successful breeding population, they don't produce impacts. And so it's kind of important to think about that. Even in the case of green crab, they have we have documentation that they have spread to far more places around the globe, or they've actually been introduced to far more places around the globe, and just haven't ever become established because the populations have died off before they've produced any impacts. Um, so it's important to keep that in mind. Um, so yes, this process, transport, establishment, spread, at any one of those stages, they may be what we considered just a non-native species in the environment. It's really when they become super abundant and produce impacts that we call them invasive. So we talked about green crab already, but let's talk about some of the features of green crab. First of all, is transport. So transport, a species has to get spread around the globe in order for it to eventually end up in a new place and start the process of becoming invasive. And that, when it comes right down to it, is a question of vectors and pathways. So, how did it move, and where did it move from, and where did it move to? And um, part of what dictates whether or not a species eventually becomes established and becomes invasive has to do with the combination of those vectors and pathways. I've already kind of highlighted where green crab are native from, and where they've spread. It was back in 1817 that we've had the first recorded documented evidence of green crab spreading from Europe to the Atlantic coast of North America, likely in the ballast of ships. And it used to be that old sailing ships used hard ballast. They would just gather up stone from the shore and put it in the holds of their ship. Oftentimes, those stones would be covered in all different types of kelp and algae, and nestled within those kelps would be baby crabs and a whole bunch of other things. When they get to their destination, they would toss out the ballast, and that just became a great way to spread green crab around. And so, of course, the West Coast invasion is relatively young in comparison with the East Coast invasion, which is oftentimes why we use it as a point of comparison. And then for green crab, once they are introduced to a new area, they oftentimes spread through just sort of a natural process. Green crab, like most crabs, have sort of a two-part life history. There's, of course, the benthic, bottom-dwelling animal that we all know and appreciate, with four pairs of walking legs in their claws. But they also have this larval phase. Um, the eggs hatch, the females cast off the larvae into the water column, and larvae, like this very large zoea here, spread in ocean water in prevailing currents. Now, in 1989, as I said, green crab spread from the East Coast to the West Coast, likely not as larvae. That would be silly. They wouldn't be able to get across the continent. But there's a very good evidence that when seafood was shipped from the East Coast to the West Coast, they packed it in seaweed. Again, seaweed is a great substrate to spread baby crabs around. when those lobsters and bait worms and other things were transported from the East Coast to San Francisco Bay, the folks unpacking those boxes just tossed the seaweed packing into San Francisco Bay and the green crab spread. So, it's one thing to spread. The second piece is establishment. And one of the things that really uh, helps green crabs in their ability to establish places is the availability of suitable habitat. It's not just that they get there, but that they have suitable habitat when they get there. And one of the things that helps green crab out is that they have a very broad range of environmental tolerances. So we have a couple of very crude sort of graphics down here that I think kind of highlight some of these things. If you compare uh, green crab, which is here in the black box, to Dungeness crab, which is, let's imagine that there's the white bars here. The range of temperatures and salinities that green crab can accommodate is just phenomenal. I mean, really, they're an amazing species in terms of their adaptability to a variety of habitats. So green crab can survive from temperatures to freezing, from freezing all the way up to 35 degrees Celsius, which is quite warm, compared to a Dungeness crab, which is really from about 3 to 18 degrees Celsius. Similarly, uh, green crab can survive in near fresh water all the way up to 35 parts per thousand. So it's incredibly salty water. So that gives them the ability, or it allows them to survive and thrive in such a broad range of habitats that they oftentimes can find a niche, even when native species in that area cannot. Um, the other thing that I think is worth pointing out is that and this is actually a fairly common feature of invasive marine species, is they tend to be estuarian in nature, meaning that they thrive well in estuaries. Uh, and that has a lot to do with how they're transported or how they tend to be transported, right? Most large shipping ports occur in estuaries. So um, in olden times, these ships would pick up hard ballast in one port and they would transport it to another port and drop off their ballast, which would essentially transport a green crab, for instance, from a suitable habitat to another suitable habitat. And the same thing happens today, although now instead of hard ballast, we use ballast water. Um, then in the case, once they arrive and they become established, populations grow and growing population growth is a function of a couple of things. One, it's a function of them finding suitable food, suitable prey, and then flourishing. And we can say green crab are very good at that because they eat an extremely wide variety of plants and animals. You name it, if a green crab can get it into their mouth, they will consume it. I will say this is sort of anecdotal, but I have seen in places where these crab are extremely abundant, I have seen them actually crawl out of the water, grab things from the shore, and then pull them back in. Um, they are remarkable in that regard. We've done quite a bit of diet work here within Washington State, and we have found them consuming everything from microscopic algae all the way through fish and even insects. So if they can come in contact with it, they will eat it. And I should point out that some of their favorite foods are things that we like to eat too. So their favorite foods tend to be shellfish, oysters, clams, cockles, mussels, but they will also prey on small Dungeness crab. Okay, so they're an efficient generalist predator, and they're also a very effective competitor. Now, I say this, knowing I'm sure that you're all thinking to yourselves, well, I already told you that a green crab is not very big. Dungeness crab get twice, if not three times larger. The issue isn't with an adult green crab and an adult Dungeness crab. The issue is that what tends to happen is that green crab at all of their life history stages tend to occupy habitats where much smaller crabs live. So that's small Dungeness crab, like the juveniles, and our small native shore crabs. So they are they tend to have a size advantage on many of our native crabs in the habitats that they occupy. And as I said, they become extremely abundant in the places where they become established. What's I think sort of interesting about them, and akin in some ways to our native shore crabs, like the hairy shore crab, is that they don't mind being at very high densities, and so it's not uncommon to find them in large aggregations, which, not surprisingly, also helps them to find mates. So uh, so they aggregate, they reproduce very efficiently. Female can produce several hundred thousand eggs, and she can produce multiple broods a year. And then she can cast those larvae off into the water column, and then they can spread from there, which is how they, as again, how they spread up the coast, really in the you know very small amount of spread in the late 80s, early 90s, but then in 97, 98, just a tremendous amount of spread. Okay. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm very happy to entertain questions as I'm going along. Okay. I gotta see if I can figure out where we're going from here. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. That's my problem. Apologies. Okay, so now I already mentioned that as they spread up the coast, they've mostly been out on the outer coast of Washington State, British Columbia. They've even spread now as far north as southeast Alaska. And until around 2012, we had a reprieve within the Salish Sea, and that was because surface flow out of the Strait of Juan de Fuca moves from east to west. Um, and it wasn't until that population became established in 2012 in Souk Inlet that we started to become worried. And then we had our first detection within the inland waters of Washington State in 2016. And you may have heard of that. That was actually a detection by a group of citizen scientists within our crab team monitoring network. All right. So the the real concern as the crabs have spread into Washington has been, what is going to happen within the inland waters? What are going to be the impacts here? And we might expect the same. Let me see if I can get this to advance. It's not advancing. Yeah. Um, we might expect the same sorts of impacts within the inland waters of Washington State that we have seen elsewhere around the globe. So primarily they're feeding on shellfish resources, which are of course very important to our native tribes and for recreational consumption. We have obviously large aquaculture interests in the state of Washington as well. We are concerned about the spread of green crab into eelgrass meadows because of the importance of eelgrass meadows to forage fish and salmon. And then, of course, we're also worried about what they might do within marsh habitats as they become much more abundant. So those are our primary areas of concern. And then, of course, there's going to be knock-on effects to other species within food webs and eventually to humans as well. And I did point out that we have done a certain amount of investigation of green crab diets. It's always nice to throw in a graph highlighting the research that we've done. This was by one of our colleagues, a student working with us that investigated the stomach contents of crabs out in Willapa Bay. And this is just showing the variety of some of the more common prey items in their guts. Hairy short crab sand shrimp, staghorn sculpin, amphipods, shiner perch, softshell clams, Dungeness crab, manila clams. Those are all things that we found in their guts. I'm highlighting in this case hairy short crab uh, because it was an incredibly important part of the diet. And as we all probably are aware from any time we spend on the beach, hairy short crab are an incredibly important part of our native fauna. You flip over any rock in the Salish Sea, you're likely to find hairy short crab, which means that there's an abundant food source for green crab. Uh, I should also highlight that in places where green crab have become abundant, the numbers of hairy short crab have dropped precipitously. Uh, Hairy short crab are important prey for our native species. They're also really important for nutrient cycling in our estuaries and in the Salish Sea. So it's something to be concerned about. And this is just another graph kind of highlighting what we have seen across sites. This is a graph of some experimental work that a colleague has done that looked at um, the number of hairy short crab that are consumed as the abundance of green crab increases. And it's kind of as you would expect. The hairy short crab do pretty well when green crab are fairly rare, but as their numbers increase, the consumption of hairy short crab increases dramatically. So this graphic is really just to highlight that right now, we like to think of what's happening out on the outer coast of Washington and what's happening in the inland waters of Washington state as being fairly different. In the outer coast of Washington, abundance of green crab is extremely high. And that's in part because you can imagine that the coastal ocean is just sort of awash in green crab larvae. There are large populations to the south of us in Oregon and California. There are large populations to the north of us on the outer coast of Vancouver Island. So pretty much year round, there are a lot of larvae that are coming into our coastal estuaries. Green crab are widespread. Their range is more or less continuous. And that's where we have started seeing the impacts that I just showed you in terms of the diet of the crabs and the loss of hairy short crabs. Now, in the inland waters, overall, the populations are by and large fairly low. There's a smattering here and there, and there are monitoring and control efforts to try and address that. Their populations are sparser, they're more restricted, and certainly they haven't been established nearly as long. So um, we have in some ways sort of a jumpstart on addressing the challenge. Unfortunately, back in 1998, when green crab spread to the outer coast of Washington, we didn't do a very good job of managing that invasion. And in fact, more or less, the state stopped managing green crab back in around 2002 and didn't start up again until 2016. So that's a lot of time for green crab to become established and produce impacts. We're doing a much better job in the inland waters. We have, of course, had the emergency declaration, which has been incredibly helpful, and that's done a lot to get the state and tribes and other entities engaged in successful management. We've also been doing a much better job of tracking the spread of the invasion. This graphic kind of, I'm just going to I'm going to let it play so you can see what's happened. All of the white dots on this map are our monitoring sites. And what you're seeing is sort of the arrival of green crab in our inland waters and our detections and subsequent management of those areas over time. In 2020, you'll see those really dark dots show up, and that's because of the area known as the Lummi Sea Pond, which is a very restricted area where the population exploded quite rapidly. And I think in some ways is indicative of something we need to be mindful of and be paying attention to. The important thing is even most recently, where you see a lot more red on the map, we're still talking about captures of tens to hundreds, not thousands to hundred thousands in most cases. So uh, other than that one site, the Lummi Sea Pond site, which actually the catch has gone down dramatically in recent years. Okay, so I let that play out one more time, and now I can continue on. This is just giving you an overview of catches in the inland waters in 2025. Again, scaled across our network and all of our sites. Um, most of the catches are in northern Puget Sound and in the northern area of Hood Canal. To date, we haven't found any green crab in southern Hood Canal or in the central or southern portion of Puget Sound. And this is really just to kind of highlight catches in the various areas. I wanted to highlight Lummi Sea Pond. That was that area that I showed you back in 2021, 2022 had such high numbers. Through very active management of that sea pond, the numbers have dropped down extremely low. So this is, I think, just great evidence that when we apply enough effort in a concerted way and in an organized way, we can actually have a pretty dramatic impact even on a very well-established population. I think it's worth highlighting. I'm showing you three graphics, and the top one is Drayton Harbor, which is right up here by the border. The Lummi Sea Pond, which I've already mentioned, and then Discovery Bay. The scale on each one of these is very, very different, right? So obviously Lummi Sea Pond, extremely, we're going all the way to 400, whereas in the case of Drayton Harbor, it only goes to 25. All right. Show you a little close up on Whidbey Island, just for your interest there. And this just kind of highlighting that this is just showing that we've found Essamilk Bay, that's new fairly recently. Cornet Bay has been trapped repeatedly, but we never found any green crab there. And then as of October 6th, the Swinomish tribe has found some crabs in the area there. It's sort of the northern part of sort of the North Whidbey Basin. All right. Well, before I go any further, I realize it's already 6:10. Do you have any questions? I've kind of given you an overview of green crab and kind of their spread in this area. I am happy to tell you more about what we're doing in terms of management, or to answer any questions that you have about green crab at this point.
John, I did want to ask you, if you're not going to speak to it just in the sequence here, about the management there in the Lummi Sea Pond, because that's pretty dramatic. What did that actually entail?
Oh yeah, no, I'd be happy to talk about that. I mean, first of all, all credit goes to the Lummi Nation. They declared an emergency right away, and they were able to secure funding to put just a tremendous amount of human effort into that area. And when I say a huge amount of human effort, I mean really, I think they were able to put up to 400 traps into the pond in a relatively short period of time. They had folks checking those traps, rebaiting those traps on a daily basis. They were able to engage tribal fishermen and contract with them to do extensive trapping by boat within the inner portion of the pond. So not only around the margins of the pond, but in the interior of the pond as well. And so what they were able to do through that process, I mean, it's the sea pond is, I think, a really fascinating kind of microcosm in that we know that green crab were able to get in there, probably just larvae were able to get in, they became established. And then the pond itself became an incubator, because once the larvae were released by that first set of colonists, they essentially just stayed within the pond. So imagine hundreds of thousands of larvae released in the pond, staying within the pond. The pond is also extremely artificial. There aren't a lot of predators, so they were able to settle out. They had very, very high survival. And so the pond, um, that population was able to establish faster than anything we've ever seen. By the same token, though, it's not getting a lot of influx of larvae from elsewhere within the Salish Sea, uh, because there's just not a lot. It is a closed pond, and so by putting a tremendous amount of effort into eliminating the adult population, particularly the females, uh, they were able to reduce breeding success fairly substantially, and just reduce those numbers down. Now, the issue, of course, is that they can't take their foot off the gas, because if they do, it's very likely that population will rebound. And that, I think, is the unfortunate but important lesson of invasive species, is that once they become established, eradication is not it's not typically a realistic option, because not to quote a really classic movie, but nature finds a way, right? And in a population of crabs, once established, um, it doesn't take that many of them to continue to sustain a population. Even within the sea pond, which is, as I said, a closed body of water, uh, the only way that the only way they're keeping that population down is by continuing a huge amount of effort for what we think of as diminishing returns, right? And that is actually a problem with most invasive species management, is that most people who are out trying to capture green crab are trying to maximize their catches. So as soon as they trap a population down, so they reduce it from a really high number to a low number, they move on to another area where the numbers are high. Well, that gives that population a chance to rebound. So it is an unfortunate part of the process that once we begin management of invasive species, we can't really stop. Uh, and because if we do, we just give the species a chance to rebound. Now, one of the advantages, though, that I will say of any sort of effort is that, as I already mentioned to you, we see the most significant impacts of green crab where their population numbers are extremely high. So if we can do anything to knock their numbers down, we reduce their impact. And largely, uh, through most of the Salish Sea, we're doing a pretty effective job at that. We know from work that's been done elsewhere that the population sizes that we currently see through most of the inland waters of the Salish Sea are low enough that we wouldn't anticipate to see an impact on our native species.
Is there any management going on in Drayton Harbor similar to what's going on in Lumi?
It is at a lower level. There's lower intensity, but the Northwest Straits is doing a lot of work up in that area right now. Currently, we have the state split up into management areas. I wish I had a map of the management areas for you. And within each one of those management areas, there is a group of interested parties that meet regularly, share information, and track their progress. And currently, there's a dedicated group that's out doing regular. And in fact, actually, we'll go back to this graphic here. The data that you see here, um, that is catch rate from that group in Drayton Harbor.
So it looks like they're not being successful from that graph in reducing the population.
Yeah, and so this is one of the situations, or one of the I guess an important point. There's a couple things that we could say is going on here. One is that chances are the effort would need to be much higher to see a drop in numbers. But also the difference between Drayton Harbor and the Lemmy Sea Pond is that the Drayton Harbor site is actually a fairly open site. It's receiving influx of larvae much more regularly than we would see in the Lemmy Sea Pond. So if you can imagine, the Lemmy Sea Pond is sort of closed, Drayton Harbor is more open. And so we're going to see some fluctuations, as you can see that here from 2018 all the way through 2024. We have ups and downs, but most recently we've had some higher numbers.
So I know there was many millions of dollars put into Lummi. I mean, what's the effort in the rest of the state in terms of management?
The effort in so our problem, of course, is that we're operating on multiple fronts simultaneously. And Lemmy Sea Pond is sort of that sort of the thing that sticks out within the inland waters. Imagine Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor are a lot like Lemmy Sea Pond, but much, much larger, and also much, much more open. So there's a lot of effort going on in Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor between shellfish growers, the conservation districts out there, and Fish and Wildlife, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. In the inland waters, there's still effort by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, but a lot of what's going on in terms of regular monitoring and control trapping is being done by tribes and other groups in their more local areas.
Are they still getting the state funding? I know the legislature appropriated, I don't know, something like 10 million, $17 million to the tribes. That money is still going to the tribe, even though populations are low, or has that money been cut off? Or
Right now, I can't speak to the specifics, but there hasn't been any loss of funding that I am aware of. I think that that the most recent allocations kind of kept funding flat. So the effort is still going into setting traps. And I will say that despite the fact that catches are relatively low in many of these areas, the effort continues to be pretty high. So there's a lot of traps being set. And that the reason for that, which, again, this gets to sort of the philosophy of this sort of effort, is that what we really want to do is deal in diminishing returns. We actually want to keep the populations low, and so high effort with low returns is kind of where you want to be. When you get to a point where the populations are large, then you've already kind of missed your opportunity to eliminate a pocket. And so that's what's largely going on through the efforts. All of the white dots that you see there on the map, those are just regular trapping locations where green crabs haven't been found. A lot of these places, this is of course 2025, a lot of the places you will note that have seen green crab in the past no longer have green crab present. That's because just like putting out hot spots with a wildfire, we're trying to get those things before they become established.
Hi, I want to say something. Two things. One is I really want to acknowledge the indigenous community for noticing these invasive species and taking action, because that's really critical to keeping this place in balance, A. And B, this may go without saying to this group, but maybe, I don't know. I just want to say that it's one thing when you have invasive species on a terrestrial system, and it's another thing when you have an invasive species in an aquatic system. And when you have that, it's really critical that you keep it at bay, and it's really hard because the spread is so much more I don't know what to say, like tenacious, for lack of a better word. So I just want to acknowledge you for thank you for catching this, because this is big, and to keep it at bay does require this concerted effort on all the different ecosystems part, all the different communities that live on the bay.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And I've known other places where they've had to just poison everything to get rid of invasive species. Like people that release things from their aquarium, thinking, oh, and then it takes hold.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. It's really not good. And this is big deal. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say that what is unique in terms of addressing the green crab invasion in our region is that we've been doing within the inland waters, proactive monitoring um, since before green crab arrived. I mean, we started our work. I mean, we knew that there was that population in Suc Basin, but we had a network in place doing regular monitoring in 2015. And it wasn't until the following year that we started seeing green crab within the inland waters of Washington State. And so we've seen a very clear signal of their arrival. And because we got such an early start, we were able to work closely with population geneticists. So we were able to track the invasion and the origin of the invasion um, throughout that entire process. So it's been obviously really valuable for management. It's also given us tremendous insight into the uh, the dynamics of the population and how it's spread. So that has all been really useful to us as we continue this work. Any other questions that I can help with?
I have a question.
Sure.
I think you spoke earlier. I think you were talking about like the bounty hunters, um, with them, as part of the eradication movement. Are we killing them, or are we trying to keep them from reproducing, like sterilizing? Like what are the efforts, or like how are we eradicating?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, this gets into a whole set of really interesting questions and debates. Around the globe, there have been a number of different efforts to try and reduce the impact of green crab. In some places, they use a bounty system for collecting and disposing of green crab. The issue with bounty systems tends to be across invasive species is that bounty hunters um, are people who make decisions oftentimes around the profitability of their actions, which makes complete sense. So they're going to go to places where the creature is abundant, and they're going to trap or remove until it's no longer profitable, and then they're going to move on to another area, which honestly doesn't oftentimes allow us to reduce the population adequately. Um, that's been a criticism of bounty systems in the past. In terms of what we do in Washington State, the crabs are removed, they're humanely euthanized, and then they're composted. And there are a number of different compost facilities that groups work with to try and turn the waste products into something useful. There have been efforts beyond composting. There's been efforts to create animal feed. There's an ongoing effort in several places to try and produce a fish bait or a crab bait from the harvested product. In on the U.S. East Coast, because they long since gave up on really trying to eliminate green crab, they've work to try and create actual markets for the product. So they'll create like a crab meal paste, and they've tried to work that into local cuisine and produce other products as well. That hasn't been we haven't really wanted to pursue that in our region because our primary goal is to keep the population down, and incentivizing a market for the crab seems a little counterproductive at this stage. But that's certainly something that has been done elsewhere. But you are right in that for other invasive species, efforts have included, release of sterile males. We see that a lot in insects, um, and other approaches to try and reduce the birth rate. But here it's just our primary approach is the mass removal of both males and females using baited traps. Other questions?
Thank you for that.
Sure, you're welcome. Well, so forgive me. I don't. This is where I lost the brief from Emily. She wasn't really feeling well enough to tell me. I wasn't sure how much more time we had or what else you would like me to discuss. I'm happy to do whatever is most useful to the group.
I guess my first question is, do you have more slides that you wanted to go through?
I mean, I could tell you a little bit about Crab Team, which is the organization that both Emily and I work with, and what we do. I'm also happy to answer questions about sort of the system of management and how we work collaboratively with various groups. Um, I could go into I could really honestly, when it comes to crabs, I could talk for hours. I don't want to bore you all with details. But I have been doing this for I've been doing this for a very long time.
I think might be useful is if you could tell us on Whidbey Island, where are the potential hotspots? Where are the where would we expect green crabs to turn up, be most abundant, and how much? I know you have some sampling going on. Do you have enough sampling on Whidbey to keep on top of things if something happens? And
Yeah.
what could we do to help out with
Yeah,
that?
no, I really appreciate that. Well, I'll go back to this graphic here. It might be helpful to kind of zoom in on Whidbey. So one of the things that's really interesting about green crab is that although they can survive in a lot of different places and they have a broad range of tolerances, they tend to become initially established in particular types of habitats. These tend to be low energy embayments and marshes, oftentimes in areas that retain water at low tide. When I say low energy, I mean low wave action. And so one of the things that we did initially is we established our monitoring sites in these places. And we have seen green crab occur in some of these places like Hancock Lake, Lagoon Point, Cultus Bay. Uh, these are all, over in Pin Cove. We've established these monitoring sites there because we see them as potential hotspots. As I said, we've collected a few individuals here and there. The way that the effort typically manifests itself in terms of our management is that uh, between the Crab Team monitoring network and then our partners with various agencies and tribes, we identify locations that are likely to be good foundational habitats for green crab, and we can identify that oftentimes from the aerial or satellite imagery. We have our group monitors, crab team volunteers monitor their sites monthly from April through September. That's when the crabs tend to be most active and most willing to enter traps. And then our partners are also trapping other areas that seem suitable. And then through those efforts, we are essentially doing a certain amount of prospecting and monitoring for the crabs. And if we get detections, then we launch what we consider a rapid response action. And that's a concerted effort to set a large number of traps in a relatively well-defined area to try to establish the margins of the infestation. So if we get a single hit, then we'll put a bunch of traps in an area and see how widespread that infestation might be. And once we've done that, we might then follow that up with repeated high intensity efforts until our numbers are reduced to zero or near zero. And then periodically follow that up with trapping, with maybe an effort once or twice a year, just to make sure that things have been reduced adequately. And that's been a fairly successful approach thus far. There have been some recent observations. This Mission Beach area and Sunlight Beach, that's about as we're getting in Cultus Bay. Those are about as far south within the main portion of Puget Sound as we've seen. And so we certainly are going to be keeping an eye on those things, and there's going to be ongoing continued effort. But the numbers are still extremely low. Like in these places where we're seeing just ones and tens. We're not seeing any. We're not at this point seeing evidence of multiple cohorts, meaning multiple age classes over successive years. So it's going to be a matter of just tracking these things, doing that more intensive trapping effort, and then subsequent monitoring.
I noticed you don't have any sampling in Holmes Harbor, which seems to me like that would be a pretty nice habitat. And I know at least one person that lives there that might that might put a trap out.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one to think about. I don't know much about Holmes Harbor. I'm sure Emily would know better. Her family's on Whidbey Island, and I know she knows the area far better than I do. But we're always interested in looking at these places and doing some sort of some exploratory trapping. Part of why we chose the sites we did for the crab team monitoring network is because we're looking for a very particular set of characteristics. And part of that is the characteristics that make it a good habitat for green crab, and part of it is the characteristics that make it a good habitat for our volunteers to work in, meaning that it's safe and accessible. Some of our partners have a little bit more flexibility with where they go. But I'll tell you, one of the fundamentally important issues that we face is access. Because if we can't access a site, that becomes a challenge, especially when if we don't have a shore-based access, then we're relying on boat access, and that becomes very complicated.
And so I guess another question that we would have is like, who are your partners that you're working with on Whidbey Island, like Sound Water Stewards or any of those groups?
Yes, yeah. So I do know that we work with Sound Water Stewards. I'm trying to think of who else. Let me just check my notes real quick to get a sense. And again, I will say this is where I tend to be operating within Crab Team on sort of a high level 30,000 foot view, whereas Lisa Watkins and Emily are in the weeds, working directly with our partners more closely. But I can take a look here, and certainly if I cannot find it now, I can get you a list based on the group that's in that management area.
That would be awesome, because that's when we think about it, that's how we can help to figure out how we can better partner with you and support your efforts.
Yes, yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. Let me look for that. Penny, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, hi. I'm kind of dittoing what other people are saying. I'm sorry, I'm having like a sneezing moment, but excuse me. But that said, I want to say, are you like partnering with local people who have knowledge, who are living on the bay, community members who are watching these things?
Yeah, I will say that
Sorry.
there are a couple of ways that that we work with community members. Uh, so our group, Washington Sea Grants Crab Team, we, as I said, we run the Crab Team program where folks can sign up to be as part of our monitoring program and can contribute as part of monitoring teams at our select sites. We also run a program called Molt Search, which um, is a more diffuse program. I'll see if I have any slides on that here. But that one is one where anyone can participate in the Molt Search protocol. It's an app-based uh, protocol. So you log into the app, you go to a beach, you conduct a 20-minute timed search of the shoreline, mostly looking for molt. So evidence of, like the molts here on the screen, evidence of green crab in the area. And then you log that into the system, and that report comes to Lisa, who manages the program for us. Anybody on the call participate in Molt Search? I'm always curious to know if anyone here has done that.
Yeah, it'd be good to like put outreach to that so people
Yeah.
know to
Yeah.
keep an eye out. And
Yeah, and
everything you've shared is really valuable.
yeah, no,
Keep
that's
an eye out, and then that way your capacity would be increased.
yeah. Yeah, so I will say that we do in the in March, we start our trainings for a crab team for folks who want to be regularly involved in our trapping and monitoring efforts. And then around the same time, but really year round, we're doing training as part of the Molt Search protocol. And those are trainings that we do oftentimes online. We'll also do uh, field excursions where we'll just do a pop-up on a beach and do some trainings with folks as well. And uh, all our entire calendar of events is on our website. I can make sure that gets shared with all of you. Yeah. Okay. Not seeing Not seeing that I have any slides on Molt Search here, but I can certainly make sure that you get a copy to or get a information about that program.
Yeah, that's great.
So how is the Molt Search organized? You have training. Do people just go to their local beach, or is there sites that are specified and people volunteer for them?
As part of the training, we help to get people oriented to the kinds of locations where we would expect to see green crab. But the idea behind Molt Search is to give folks just the tools where they can sort of apply the training where they're at. So our crab team monitoring happens at very specific sites, and it happens monthly, April through September. But with molt search, we wanted to have a protocol, have an approach where people could look across more beaches within our region, and expand the search effort more broadly. So you can go to any beach and conduct the molt search protocol and upload your data, and provide that information to us. And that actually is incredibly useful because it gives us a map where we can say, someone was out there, someone was looking, and they didn't see anything in that location. And so not only do we have places where we, like all those white dots I showed you previously, where we have regular effort, but we can also show that there has been effort applied elsewhere too. I will tell you a side note about molt search. It is primarily geared at looking for green crab, but we actually also, there's an option for participants to collect information on Dungeness crab too, and that data gets fed into broader Dungeness crab management efforts within the Salish Sea. So we're trying to piggyback on the green crab effort to collect information for Dungeness crab management.
Well, it's been a very good Dungeness crab year. So,
Yeah, it has. I stopped sharing for a second because I was going to try to open up our molt search so I could show you something there. Any other questions for me? So I guess what I can do is I'll just share my screen right now because I just went to the molt search site.
okay.
It's through molt search is through the My Coast app. So if you download the My Coast app to report spills and pilings and things like that, you can also, there's the module for molt search, and then you this is what the reports look like. So folks will just do their time search on a beach and collect molts, and then photograph those molts, and then upload those to My Coast. So what you're seeing is just a whole bunch of examples of molts people were finding on the beach. Most of these are Dungeness crab or other native crab species. And so, no news is good news in this case. And so they're from all over the place. I see some from the San Juans, Anacortes, Lopez Island. Looks like there's a good sort of smattering of effort right now. And this map is showing where that effort has been applied to date in various regions. You can see that in some places.
Could you zoom in and see if there's any on Whidbey?
Yeah. So here's Whidbey.
Oh yeah, quite a few.
Yeah, quite a few.
Oh, that's great.
Efforts that have been carried out here. I don't know what our latest total is, but I will say that that if you sign up for the program, Lisa sends out what she calls the multimeter newsletter that gives everyone updates on what's been found to date, and what our totals look like for the year.
That was super helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and honestly, I think there are multiple ways for folks to get involved. Certainly, crab team and molt search are great ways for individuals to get involved. I think in terms of broader management, coordinating groups like as I said, the Pacific Pacific Conservation District and Grace Harbor Conservation District have gotten involved with sort of the regular management effort for green crab out there on the coast. I think it's very important, personally speaking, that we develop sort of rich and robust communities of folks within local sort of regional bodies, because I mean, I've been doing green crab work long enough to remember that back in 1998, 1999, when they were first found out on the coast, the state was quite active. Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife was quite active until the dot-com bust. If I don't know how many of you remember the dot-com bust. The bottom fell out of the state budget, and then Fish and Wildlife got out of the green crab business. So I think that green crab are not going to go away anytime soon, and they're more or less immune to changes in state budget cycles. So if we really want to manage green crab effectively, communities have to get involved in order to be resilient.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for Sean?
I just wanted to ask, is the state budget the predominant funding source, or are there other sources for the funding for the programs?
The state budget is a major funding source for efforts within the state of Washington. Many of the tribes receive funding from some federal sources, Bureau of Indian Affairs and the like. As you can imagine, a lot of federal funding sources have dried up, and that's been really hard for many of our groups to weather. So right now, a lot of it is based in state funding. But
Hey, thank you guys.
sure.
Any more questions? All right. Well, Sean, thank you very, very much for this super informative education session for us. We learned a lot.
Yeah.
I've got a whole bunch of notes here, so this is super. And I think you're going to have more people on your molt search.
That would be
I might be
fantastic.
one of those.
So we'd be super excited. And honestly, I will tell you, it's a lot of fun. It's a little bit like an Easter egg hunt. You'll be surprised. You get out on a beach and you start looking for molts. And, I think finding any sort of molt is interesting. Finding a green crab molt, it gets very exciting for folks pretty quickly. But yeah, I would encourage you to check it out. It's a very, you know, it's a low effort way to get involved. Anybody can do it anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I like molt search parties. That's a good idea. All right. Well, thank you so much. If you have additional questions, please let us know. I will work with Emily and Lisa to give you a better sense of who on Whidbey Island we are currently involved with. And we'll make sure that we can send some other resources your way so that you're aware of things.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. You all have a nice evening.
You too.
Thanks, Sean. That was terrific.
Thanks, Sean.
All right.
All right.
All right. Well, have a great night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.